Two children stand at your car window in an empty parking lot. Pale faces, polite voices. They ask for a ride. You reach for the door handle. Your hand moves, not because you chose to, because something is pulling your fingers toward the lock, compelling you, overriding you. Then you see their eyes, not dark, not shadowed, black, entirely black. No whites, no pupils. No human depth at all, only void staring back. "We cannot come in unless you tell us it is okay," one whispers. "Let us in." This is not a request. It is a test. Will you grant permission to something wearing a child's face? Will your hand finish what it started? This is the Pandora's Project. Tonight, we unseal together a case file that began with a single internet post in 1998. One journalist's account on a ghost hunting mailing list. Then the pattern exploded. Multiple countries worldwide. Hundreds of witnesses, all describing the same compulsion, the same black eyes, the same request for the one word that breaks the threshold. Yes. But what the archives reveal is darker than the children. They show how one story can give shape to scattered fears, how a single account becomes a template, and how people across decades begin to see the same thing, whether it ever existed or not. Or perhaps the legend didn't spread because someone invented it, but because something ancient finally found the language it needed to be noticed. If you're new here, welcome to the community that looks past the comforting version of things. If you've been with us for a while, you already know the rule. We follow the evidence, especially when the truth is uncomfortable. So if you want to go deeper into the legends that refuse to die, subscribe. And if you're ready to explore what a perfectly repeated pattern reveals about the human mind, give this video a thumbs up. Some legends spread not because they are real, but because something inside us wants them to be, and that may be the darkest truth of all. No police reports, no medical records, no photographs, only testimonies, only echoes, only the question we cannot ignore. Did we uncover a real phenomenon? Or did one late-night post teach thousands of people to see the same nightmare? The investigation begins now. Part 1. How one post created a legend. January 16th, 1998. A post appears on an electronic mailing list dedicated to paranormal encounters. The author is Brian Bethel, a respected reporter from Abilene, Texas, known locally for his cautious approach to unexplained claims. He was not a fantasist, not a man seeking attention, and not someone who embellished stories for effect. His reputation was grounded in verification, interviews, and evidence-based reporting. The post describes an event from 2 years earlier, in the summer of 1996. Bethel had been sitting in his vehicle outside a cinema in downtown Abilene, finishing paperwork before the business closed. It was an unremarkable Wednesday night, with quiet streets, warm air, and only the glow of the marquee overhead providing enough light to write. Then came the knock on his window. 2 boys stood outside, somewhere between 10 and 14 years old. Both wore dark coats with hoods pulled forward, partially concealing their faces. Bethel assumed they wanted money. He cracked the window a few inches, already reaching for his wallet. The taller boy spoke first. They needed a ride, he said. They wanted to see the film showing that night, but their money was at their mother's house. Could he take them there? It would not take long. "We're just 2 kids. We don't have a weapon or anything." That last phrase froze Bethel. They did not have a weapon. Why would children need to say that? Why would they know he was considering whether they might be dangerous? He hesitated. Something felt wrong. Not threatening exactly. Worse. A sensation he could not name. Primal fear with no source. Then he looked at their eyes. The records preserve his exact words: coal black, no pupil, no iris, just solid black, like two great swaths of starless night, like staring into nothing, like staring into void. His hands went cold. His throat tightened. His mind, he wrote, exploded in a vortex of all-consuming terror. The boys didn't look away. The taller one pressed closer to the window. His voice stayed calm, almost mechanical. "We cannot come in unless you tell us it is okay," he said. "Let us in." Bethel's hand moved to the window control, moved on its own. He watched his fingers drift toward the switch, toward the button that would let them in. Not because he wanted to, because something was pulling him. A compulsion he did not choose, an invisible force guiding his fingers. He forced himself to look away, broke eye contact. In that moment, the compulsion released. He rolled the window up and drove. The taller boy slammed his palm against the glass as the vehicle pulled away, shouting, "Let us in. We cannot come in unless you say we can." Bethel checked his rearview mirror. The parking lot stretched empty behind him. Both boys had vanished. The lot had one entrance. He had been gone less than 30 seconds. The Post sat on the mailing list for 6 hours before the first reply arrived. Then another. Then 15 more by dawn. A woman in Portland, Oregon, wrote that she had experienced the same encounter the previous autumn. Different children. Same void eyes. Same request for entry. Same vanishing. Others followed. Each account varied in details. Door knocks instead of car windows. Different cities. Different ages of children. But 4 elements appeared in every single report. The children always traveled in pairs or small groups, never alone. They demanded entry with increasing aggression when refused. Voices that had been polite turned cold. Faces that had seemed normal twisted into something else. They could not cross thresholds without explicit permission. Car doors, house doors, any barrier required the spoken yes. And the eyes. Every witness described the same thing. Bottomless black. No variation, no whites, no color, just void. Bethel's post remained online. Within 2 years, it had been copied to dozens of forums, ghost hunting sites, paranormal databases, urban legend archives. The story spread like infection. He never recanted. According to television coverage, Bethel appeared on a series called Monsters and Mysteries in America, retelling his account on camera with the same details. According to available records, he wrote follow-up coverage for his newspaper, maintaining that the encounter was genuine. The archive shows no evidence he profited from the account. No book deals. No lecture tours. Just a journalist describing what he claims happened in a parking lot on a summer night in 1996. But the Post opened something. A door that had been closed. Because once people knew the pattern had a name, they started seeing it everywhere. The accounts multiplied. The pattern held. But one detail appeared that changed everything. A report claiming this had happened decades before Bethel, before the internet, before anyone knew the name. We will examine that claim next. Part 2. Why every story matches. The digital archives contain hundreds of accounts, including forum posts, late-night messages, and stories shared by people who believed they were alone until they found others describing the same thing. One of the earliest testimonies came from a user called SarahBeth11. She described a quiet evening at home when she heard a light knock at the front door. Nothing unusual. When she opened it, 2 children stood on the porch. A girl who looked around 11 years old. A younger boy standing beside her. Both completely still. Too still. They did not fidget. They did not glance around. They simply stared up at her with their heads tilted slightly downward, as if concealing something. The girl spoke first. She said, "Ma'am, may we come inside and use your phone to call our mother?" Her voice was polite and calm, almost rehearsed. The woman asked where they lived, where their mother was, how they had reached her house. The girl stepped forward into the porch light. Her eyes were black, fully black, empty and endless. A shock ran across the woman's skin, and every instinct she had changed at once. The urge to help vanished. Something ancient inside her warned that what she was looking at was not a child. She closed the door until only a narrow gap remained. Both children began to cry. The sound was identical, perfectly synchronized. The kind of crying that sounded learned rather than felt. She slammed the door. When she looked again through the window moments later, the porch was empty. Another testimony came from the Midwest during a winter storm. A woman heard knocking through heavy wind. When she opened the door, 2 children stood there, shivering, wearing thin clothes that were not suited for the cold. They said they were lost. She allowed them to come inside. While they were in the bathroom, her husband began bleeding from his nose without warning. The bleeding was sudden and heavy. It soaked through tissues in seconds. As she turned to get more supplies, the children were suddenly standing behind her. They said together, "Our parents are here." The children walked to the front door and left. When the woman looked through the window, she saw a dark car waiting outside. 2 tall figures sat in the front seats. The children climbed into the back. The car drove away into the snow. Her husband's bleeding stopped instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. More reports appeared across the years. Different countries, different cultures. Yet the same 4 traits repeated every time. The children always appeared in pairs or in small groups. Refusal always caused their behavior to change, shifting from politeness to cold insistence. They could not cross any threshold without a spoken invitation. And their eyes were always the same, black from edge to edge. Researchers began comparing testimonies from America, Britain, Australia, and other countries across multiple continents. The similarities were too precise to ignore. Some people believed this proved the encounters were real. Others believed it proved the opposite, that people were repeating a pattern they had absorbed from stories without realizing it. Researcher Jason Offutt documented extensive witness interviews over multiple years, collecting dozens of testimonies from people claiming encounters. Despite differences in age, culture, and location, their descriptions aligned. Each person reported an overwhelming sense of dread and the feeling that something wearing a child's shape was asking for entry. The pattern held across borders and languages. But a single question remained. If all these accounts were not real, how were so many people describing the same thing? And if they were real, then what were the children waiting for? Part 3. How far back the pattern reaches. Brian Bethel's 1998 post appears to mark the beginning. But the archives contain something that claims to be older, much older. An anonymous account, preserved on forums, published after Bethel's story gained attention. The post claims to relay an incident from a grandfather. The old man's name was Tom. The year was allegedly 1918. Texas, like Bethel's encounter, but 78 years earlier. No names provided, no documentation, no verification possible. Just a digital testimony written decades after the supposed event, asserting that the pattern existed before the internet, before anyone knew the name. This is how folklore works in the digital age. Once a template exists, we rewrite the past to prove it was always real. And because no one can disprove a grandfather's dead memory, the tale becomes indistinguishable from history. The post accomplished something powerful. It made the legend feel ancient, gave it historical weight, pushed the origin backwards in time until it seemed to predate its own creation. The story itself follows the template precisely. Summer heat stretched for months that year. Tom lived in a house near railroad tracks, common location for travelers to stop, asking for work or food. He kept the windows and doors open for any movement of air. One evening, while reading on his back porch, he heard knocking at the front door. He walked through the hallway, expecting a drifter from the trains. Two children stood in the doorframe, a boy and a girl. They asked to come inside and rest. The heat was overwhelming, they said. Their house was far away. Tom studied them carefully. Despite the brutal temperature, neither child showed signs of exertion. No sweat, no disheveled clothing. Their skin looked dull, almost waxy. Their clothes were perfectly clean. He offered them seats on the porch instead. Fresh air would be cooler, he suggested. The girl insisted they needed to come inside. It would be cooler indoors, she said. "Can we come in? Can we come in?" She repeated the phrase without variation. Mechanical, insistent. Tom reached out and touched her hand to quiet her. She looked up. Her eyes were not eyes, just two black sockets, dark, endless holes where eyes should have been. "Sir, can we come in?" she asked again. Her voice had changed, becoming flat and wrong and empty. Tom retreated to his kitchen without answering. He sat there for a long time, too frightened to look around the corner. His dog approached, trembling and whining. The animal's fear finally moved him to check the door. The children were gone. The grandson who posted this story noted that his grandfather described the encounter long before Bethel made the legend famous. But we have only the digital post. No independent verification. No records. Just retroactive folklore claiming to be older than its source. The pattern extended beyond America. Whether the 1918 account is genuine or constructed through collective memory building, other reports emerged from different continents. Staffordshire, England. A location called Cannock Chase. Dense woodland stretching across miles of heathland. In those woods, 3 children were murdered in what became one of the largest police searches in British history. Officers combed the forest following reports of crying children. They found nothing. The killings left scars on the land. In the 1980s, witnesses reported a young girl in the same forest. She appeared to be around 10 years old, crying as if lost. Those who approached to help described the same progression. The crying stopped when they got close. The girl looked up. Her eyes were bottomless black. Then she ran into the trees and vanished. Local paranormal investigator Lee Brickley documented reports of the crying child phenomenon in the area. Each described a lone crying child in Cannock Chase. Each mentioned those eyes. Each noted the sudden disappearance when the witness tried to help. Some researchers connected the ghost sightings to the murdered victims. Others noted the crying child reports predated the killings by years, perhaps decades. The pattern existed before the tragedy. The tragedy simply gave it new weight, new meaning, new context to an old fear. By the year 2014, the legend had spread into mainstream attention. British tabloids published a surge of front-page stories claiming sightings were increasing. News outlets across several countries began reporting similar encounters, each echoing the same details with growing urgency. Witnesses described clothing that seemed wrong for the era. Hoodies from defunct sports teams popular decades earlier. Victorian-style coats in modern suburbs. Old-fashioned dresses that looked like costumes, as if the children came from different times. Wearing whatever they last wore before becoming what they are now. Their speech patterns felt equally displaced. Formal phrasing, archaic word choices. May we trouble you for shelter? Can we impose upon your kindness? Language that belonged to earlier centuries, delivered in voices that never quite sounded human. Researcher Jason Offutt identified this timeless wrongness in accounts worldwide, from Texas gas stations to Australian roadsides. The children carried an aura of not belonging to the present moment, visitors from somewhere else, or somewhen else. The digital age allowed the pattern to become visible. Forums and social platforms let witnesses compare notes across continents, but the encounters themselves, whether genuine or constructed through viral template following, whether spontaneous or learned, they stretched across decades of reports. How long had the children been knocking? How many times had people opened doors to find black-eyed children waiting, asking to come inside? The archives hold no answer, only the pattern, repeating. Century after century, if the stories are true, country after country, the children at the threshold, always asking, never forcing, never entering unless invited, always waiting for someone to say yes. But what happens when someone does? The files contain testimonies, warnings, accounts that suggest the spoken yes carries consequences, dark consequences. Part 4. What happens when you say yes? The question hangs over every account. What happens when you grant permission? What crosses the threshold when someone speaks the word yes? Most encounters end with refusal. Doors slammed, vehicles driven away, witnesses escaping at the last moment. But a handful of reports describe what follows when someone lets the children inside. An elderly couple allegedly encountered 2 black-eyed children at their rural home. The children asked to come in for tea. The couple, unaware of the legend, allowed them entry. The children sat at the kitchen table, drank tea, spoke politely, and left after 20 minutes. Within 1 week, both members of the couple were diagnosed with aggressive cancer. Different types, both terminal. The archives contain no names, no hospital ledgers, and no certificates to confirm the story. Yet the account continues to circulate through forums and paranormal databases. A warning about the cost of invitation. Another testimony describes a driver who stopped for 2 children on a roadside after dark. He did not let them into his vehicle, but he hesitated when they asked. His passenger, sitting in the back seat, caught a clear glimpse of their faces through the window and saw those eyes directly. Hours later, that passenger died in an unrelated vehicle collision. The driver survived. The passenger, who had seen the children fully, did not. Again, no verification, no police file, only the story passed through digital channels, suggesting that proximity alone carries consequences, that seeing them, truly seeing what they are, exacts a price. A more detailed account comes from outside Dallas. A couple agreed to watch a large countryside property for friends who were traveling. The estate sat isolated, forest and hills surrounding it on all sides, accessible only through gated roads. One evening, after securing the livestock and preparing for a storm, the man heard knocking at the guest house door. Expecting his partner, he opened it. 3 figures stood outside, drenched from rain that had started only minutes earlier. 2 appeared to be teenagers. The third was taller, thinner, and older. All wore dark coats with hoods. All kept their faces down. They claimed to be lost in the woods. They asked to come inside. The man hesitated. The property was gated. How had they entered? The storm had barely begun. How were they already soaked through? He stalled, speaking with them through the partly open door, calling for his partner, looking for any sign she had returned. The taller figure slowly raised his head. Black eyes, endless and empty, pure void. The figure smiled. His teeth were blackened, rotted, and decayed. Then all 3 figures began calling the man by his name, his full name, names he had never told them. They laughed and said he was going to die alone. They repeated it like a chant, like a curse. He slammed the door and locked it. Moments later, his partner entered through a side entrance. She had seen no one outside. No figures. No footprints in the mud, even though the rain was heavy. The property owners later revealed that their security cameras had captured 3 ghost-like shapes moving across the lawn on previous occasions. Always 3. Always the same shapes. Never clear enough to identify. The man and his partner left the property the next morning. They never returned. The accounts raise questions no investigation has answered. Are the children supernatural beings? Physical beings? Something that exists between states? Folklore researcher Bridget Burke examined the pattern and offered a psychological explanation. Not creatures, not entities, but death wearing the mask of hope, a projection from the human mind. The children exploit humanity's instinct to protect the vulnerable. We see a child in distress, and our fear response is overridden by the need to help. That moment of instinct creates the opening, the instant where permission can be granted, the threshold can be crossed. The legend survives not because of evidence, but because it crystallizes real fears, ancient fears, threshold fears, the fear that something can mimic innocence to breach our defenses. Burke's interpretation explains why the pattern works, why it spreads, why it persists despite the absence of proof. It taps into something primal, the knowledge that predators use camouflage, that dangers disguise themselves as harmless, that we are most vulnerable when we lower our guard. Ancient cultures recognize the same structure. Greek daimons appearing as children to lure adults to harm. Norse draugr taking the form of young people to gain entry to homes. Celtic changelings replacing real children with fairy copies that brought misfortune to families who accepted them. The black-eyed children fit these archetypes. Creatures, or ideas of creatures, wearing the shape of what we are programmed to defend. They ask to cross from their world into ours. They need permission. They cannot force entry. They simply wait at thresholds until someone breaks the rule. Other theories appear in paranormal communities. Some call them vampires. Pale skin, nocturnal behavior, the need for spoken invitation before entering a home. But vampires leave bodies, wounds, and traces. Black-eyed children leave nothing except stories. Demonic texts claim black eyes mark possession. The sulfur smell reported by some witnesses matches elements of demon lore. But possession leaves witnesses and church records. This leaves none. Another theory links them to alien beings. Some compare them to the creatures called the Greys in UFO literature. Large black eyes, gray artificial-looking skin, human-like size. The children share these traits. Some suggest they may be hybrid beings, part human, part non-human. But alien encounters often leave physical traces. Radiation, implants, medical anomalies. Black-eyed children encounters do not. Skeptics propose simpler explanations. Teenagers playing pranks. Children wearing black contact lenses sold online. Groups of bored kids knocking on doors to frighten people. But this theory struggles with the timeline. Reports exist from decades before such lenses were available, before the internet, before Bethel's Post gave the legend a name. And the prank theory cannot explain the consistency. Why would hoaxers in different countries and different decades repeat the same details with such precision? The pair, the threshold rule, the mechanical speech, the vanishing. The consistency suggests something else. Either a real phenomenon with fixed characteristics, or a viral template being copied with precision. Pattern replication. Humans following a script learned from the internet. Witnesses who refuse report lasting effects. Nightmares. Fear of doorways. persistent anxiety, the sense of being watched. The encounter changes something, but they survive. The archives contain no verified testimonies from anyone who granted permission and lived long enough to explain what came after. Only warnings, only disappearances, only the elderly couple diagnosed with cancer, only the passenger who died. The word yes, once spoken, cannot be taken back. But is any of this real? Do the children exist? Or does only the legend exist? The archives hold one final truth, a truth darker than the children themselves. That truth comes next. Part 5. Why the pattern never changes. The case file contains hundreds of witness testimonies, forum posts, social media accounts, television interviews, paranormal investigation reports, digital folklore spanning nearly 30 years since Brian Bethel's original post. What it does not contain is verification. No police reports exist in any accessible database. Searches through Texas law enforcement archives reveal nothing about the Bethel encounter. No incident report was filed on the date he described. No follow-up investigation. No documentation that authorities were ever contacted. Rumors circulate online about a Texas sheriff who investigated the case and was, in his words, scared senseless by what he found. These rumors name no source, no department, and no date. Searches through sheriff office records reveal nothing. The terrified sheriff exists only in forum threads and paranormal blogs. Medical records that would confirm the cancer deaths allegedly following the elderly couple's encounter have never surfaced. No names, no hospital ledgers, no death certificates found in public records. The story exists only as a warning, not as evidence. The Midwest snowstorm case from the year 2016 revealed the same pattern. No local news coverage, no weather service records that match the account, no police investigation into men in dark suits taking children from a residence. The story exists solely in social media posts. In the archived margins of a 2010s paranormal investigation, researcher Sharon Hill documented her search for evidence. She found none. Every trail ended in whispers, friend of a friend stories, anonymous accounts, digital chains leading back to nothing solid. The pattern matches the structure of an urban legend. Stories that feel true. Stories with just enough detail to sound credible. Stories that spread by tapping into primal fears. But when examined closely, documentation vanishes. The pattern reveals something darker than supernatural children. It reveals how modern legends form. Before 1998, scattered individuals might have encountered pale children and felt a fear they could not explain. After Bethel's post, people knew what to look for. The template, the eyes, the threshold rule, the mechanical speech, the vanishing. Every subsequent account copied these elements with perfect precision. Real phenomena vary widely. Ghost encounters differ. UFO reports contradict each other. Cryptid sightings rarely match. But black-eyed children accounts repeat with mechanical consistency. The same details, the same sequence, the same characteristics. That is not mystery. That is replication. A viral template reproduced across the internet. Pattern following. Humans repeating a structure they learned. Snopes, the fact-checking organization, categorizes black-eyed children's stories as legend. Their analysis notes that all evidence is subjective testimony. Some believable. Others suspiciously attention-seeking. They recommend filing black-eyed children in the same category as Bigfoot. Believe if you wish, but recognize there is no physical evidence, only stories. Yet Brian Bethel never recanted. In the year 2024, nearly 30 years after his original encounter, he maintained that the event happened exactly as described. He gave interviews, appeared on camera, wrote articles for his newspaper. He never attempted to profit significantly. No book deals. No speaking tours. Only a consistent retelling of what he claims happened on a summer night in 1996. Either he experienced something he could not explain, or he created the most successful digital folklore legend of the internet age. Whether intentional or accidental, his post opened a door. It gave shape to fears that had been scattered and nameless. It provided a framework that allowed other people to recognize patterns in their own experiences, or to construct patterns where none existed. The legend spread through the same channels that carry all modern legends. Ghost hunting forums in the late 1990s, online horror communities in the 2000s, video platforms in the 2010s, social media threads. Each platform amplified the reach. Each generation of internet users found the pattern and added their own testimony. Ghost hunters take the reports seriously. Some classify them as extraterrestrial encounters, others as vampiric entities, others as demonic manifestations. Equipment is deployed. Night vision cameras capture nothing. Audio devices record only static. Electromagnetic field meters show no anomalies. The children appear only to isolated individuals, never to groups, never in places with surveillance, never in circumstances that would produce physical evidence. They exist in the gaps, the moments between documentation, encounters that leave witnesses shaken, with nothing to show except their fear. The pattern itself reveals something important. Whether supernatural or psychological, the black-eyed children phenomenon operates at the boundary of verification. It cannot be proven. It cannot be disproven. It exists in the space between belief and doubt. The legend resembles other cultural fears that persist without evidence. Phantom black dogs in British folklore. Shadow people. The figure known as the Hat Man. Entities that appear repeatedly across accounts, but never submit to documentation. Never leave traces. Never appear when cameras are pointed at them. Perhaps this is intentional. Perhaps beings that rely on thresholds, beings that require the spoken yes, have learned to avoid proof, to operate where terror thrives but evidence dies. Or perhaps the human mind creates patterns from coincidence, finds meaning where none exists, transforms encounters with pale children or teenagers into something monstrous. A brain under stress can amplify the smallest detail and turn it into a nightmare. The black-eyed children legend proves something about human psychology. We do not need reality to believe. We need a pattern to follow, language to describe it, and a template to replicate. One journalist's story repeated until it felt true, remixed until it seemed ancient. And suddenly, hundreds of people believed they had seen something that may have never existed. The archives cannot resolve this question. They contain only testimonies, the consistency of detail, the spread of reports across decades and continents, and the fact that something convinced hundreds of people that the children they saw were not children. And beneath all analysis, all skepticism, all rational arguments, one truth remains. The legend survives because it touches something primal, the fear of what waits outside, the understanding that barriers mean nothing unless we maintain them, the knowledge that permission is power, and power can be manipulated. Ancient folklore recognized this truth. Vampires cannot enter uninvited. Fairies cannot take children without human cooperation. Demons require a spoken word before possession. The threshold is sacred. Permission granted is surrender. Modern reports follow the same structure, not because the encounters are real, but because the fear is real. It is old, older than cities, older than civilization. The fear of what imitates the human form to cross boundaries we are supposed to guard. The legend will not die, not because it is real, not because it is false, but because it crystallizes something humanity has always known, or always feared it knows. Some doors should never be opened. Some invitations should never be granted. Some children are not children. Whether the black-eyed children exist outside the mind or only within it, the pattern remains. The warnings remain. The threshold remains. And they are still knocking. Final part. The breaking seals. The case file closes with no resolution, no proof, no answer to what Brian Bethel encountered in that parking lot, or what hundreds of others claim to have faced at doorways and roadsides across 3 decades. But the archive reveals something else. It shows how folklore forms in the digital age, how a single post can crystallize scattered fears into a named phenomenon, how the internet allows patterns to become visible that would have remained isolated stories in previous eras. Before 1998, people may have encountered pale children with unusual eyes and felt terror they could not explain. After Bethel's post, they had language. They had a pattern. They had confirmation that others had seen the same thing. The legend did not necessarily create the encounters, but it gave them shape, structure, and meaning. Whether the black-eyed children exist as supernatural entities, as psychological phenomena, or as pure folklore construction, they tap into ancient human knowledge. We recognize mimicry. We understand that predators use camouflage. We know instinctively that some requests for entry conceal threats. The requirement for permission appears across cultures because it represents a truth about boundaries, about thresholds, about consent. Barriers only function if we maintain them. The spoken yes only matters if it is given consciously. The threshold is the last defense. Once crossed, protection vanishes. The real monster may not be the children. It may be our willingness to create monsters from pattern and fear, to see what we expect to see, to transform ambiguity into certainty through collective storytelling. Or perhaps the real horror is simpler. Perhaps we need these legends. Perhaps we create them because deep knowledge demands expression. The knowledge that some words carry consequences, that some doors should stay closed, that some things that look harmless are not. If this helped you understand what spreads in the dark, support this archive with a like. Subscribe to the Pandora's Project so you are here when the next sealed case opens. Comment with which urban legend you have encountered that felt too real to dismiss. Your testimony may help others recognize the pattern. The children are still being reported. This week, this month, this year. The legend continues because something continues. Whether phenomenon or folklore, whether genuine encounters or viral template, it persists at the edges of verification, in the moments when we are alone and vulnerable, and something that looks almost human asks to come inside. The only defense is the word, no. See you in the next tomb.